Oh, hi. You scared me. I was just taking a peek because I'm so curious about this cell division stuff. Anyways, let me tell you what I've learned so far. The lab techs are currently studying asexual reproduction, which is when offspring are made by just one parent. This type of reproduction is most common among unicellular organisms, or living things made up of one cell. However, it can also occur in multicellular organisms too. Let me give you an example. Binary fission is a type of asexual reproduction common in unicellular organisms like bacteria. And what happens during binary fission is a cell grows and develops until it almost doubles in size, and then boop, it splits to form two separate cells that grow independently. Now, this splitting, or cell division, occurs through something called mitosis, which is just a series of changes that a cell goes through during cell division. And here are the 4 phases of mitosis: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Then, after going through all these steps and changes, the nucleus divides to form 2 new nuclei, which have the same number and type of chromosomes as the original. Pretty wild, right? Oh, and just as a side note, chromosomes are what hold the genes that determine specific traits or characteristics. Okay, now as I mentioned earlier, asexual reproduction can happen in multicellular organisms too. These are organisms like plants and animals that are made up of many cells, and they typically reproduce sexually. A hydra, however, is an exception. It's a multicellular organism that can reproduce asexually through a crazy process called budding. This is when the parent grows its offspring as a bud that's actually attached to the parent. Now, initially, the bud starts as one cell, but through mitosis, the cell divides into 2 cells, and the 2 cells divide into 4 cells, and the 4 cells divide into 8 cells, and so on. Obviously, as the number of mitotic divisions increases, the size of the bud increases too. This is because an increase in the number of cells simply means that the offspring is growing. What's cool is that once the offspring grows into an adult, it detaches from the parent and floats away. So, just to recap. Mitosis is a form of asexual reproduction, and whether there's one mitotic division to reproduce a unicellular organism or thousands of mitotic divisions to reproduce a multicellular organism, both result in offspring that are identical to that of the parent organism. That's the rule of thumb in asexual reproduction. Okay, let's stop here and give you time to absorb all this. I'll be back. I went ahead and made myself a checklist since there's a lot I want to share with you. Plus, the old noodle can be a bit slippery sometimes. Okay. So, we've talked about mitotic divisions, which is how unicellular and multicellular organisms can reproduce asexually. And we learned that with this type of reproduction, it doesn't matter whether it's one mitotic division for a unicellular organism or thousands of mitotic divisions for a multicellular organism. Both result in offspring that are identical to the parent organism. We can check that off too. Now, let's move on to sexually reproducing organisms. With these, meiosis must occur before mitosis. And meiosis, in case you forgot, is the type of cell division that goes through 2 rounds of the 4 mitotic steps: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. The result of this is reproductive cells that have half the original number of chromosomes. We see this kind of sexual reproduction in many species, including humans. Females produce egg cells, and males produce sperm cells. What's crazy is that we also see it in plants. Egg and sperm cells are actually produced in the flowers of flowering plants. And as you know, once an egg cell and sperm cell combine, voila! The development of a new individual begins. Okay. So let's talk about that new individual. It receives genetic material from its mother through the egg cell and from its father through the sperm cell. However, sexually produced offspring are never identical to either of their parents, which is totally fortunate for organisms that have unattractive parents, right? Sorry, that's not very nice. Anyways, let's see how this new multicellular critter develops. After the one cell gets fertilized, it divides to form two cells through the process of mitosis. Then the organism continues to grow and develop, so the two cells divide to make 4 cells, then 8 cells and 16 cells and so on. Amazingly enough, this mitotic division continues until there are thousands, millions, billions, or trillions of cells, all depending on the size of the multicellular organism, of course. Oh, and mitosis doesn't just happen for growth and development of the organism. It also replaces damaged or dead cells. For example, skin cells and red blood cells go through mitosis to replace dead cells. Unfortunately, some cells, like kidney or lung cells, can't be replaced, which is why damage to the kidneys or lungs is super dangerous. I think that's plenty for now. Feel free to review while I grab a question, and I'll see you in a sec. Alright guys, let's do a quick recap before we move on. We learned that meiosis only produces cells for sexual reproduction, and to do this, it goes through 2 rounds of the 4 mitotic phases: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And the result? Reproductive cells with half the original number of chromosomes, of course. Now, if it's still not making a lot of sense, it's totally fine, because we're going to go through each of the steps one by one. Okay, so before the first round of the 4 mitotic steps, or meiosis 1, begins, we have interphase. Here, the chromosomes duplicate, making chromosomes that have 2 identical sister chromatids. Next, let's look at prophase 1, which is where meiosis 1 begins. During this phase, homologous chromosomes pair up. Homologous chromosomes are a set, or 2 pair of chromosomes. One pair comes from the male parent, and the other pair comes from the female parent. Keep in mind that on these chromosomes, the genes for the same trait are in the same positions, and within each set, chromatids of the homologous chromosomes trade matching parts. This trading is called crossing over. Basically, crossing over rearranges genetic information. This is one of the reasons that resulting reproductive cells are never identical to either parent. Okay, now let's move on to metaphase 1. Here, the homologous chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. Think of it this way: meta, middle, both start with M. Anyways, the position that the pairs of chromosomes take on one side or the other of the middle line provides even more variety in the resulting reproductive cells. Then we go into anaphase, where pairs of homologous chromosomes are split up, but the sister chromatids stay attached. And next up is, telophase. Here, the chromosomes, which are still in duplicate form, arrive at the poles of the cell. And the last part of meiosis 1 is cytokinesis. This is when 2 cells, each with the same number of chromosomes as the original cell, are formed. Phew! Now, I know that's a bunch of info and that you might have questions. Things like, so Gretchen, how is it that reproductive cells only produced through meiosis have half the original number of chromosomes? And to this I would say, well, mind keeper, this reduction in chromosomes actually happens during the second round of mitotic steps, meiosis 2. And it just so happens that we'll be talking about this after a quick break. Alright, this is the last segment on today's topic and you are doing awesome! But before we cover meiosis 2, let's run through this list of what happened during meiosis 1. Okay, so crossing over occurred and homologous chromosomes were separated. Then 2 daughter cells were formed with the same number of chromosomes as the original cell. Also, after meiosis 1, the nuclei may or may not return to this interphase step. It just depends on the organism. But whether it does or not, the chromosomes are not duplicated again. Because of this, it's during the second half of meiosis, or meiosis 2, that the number of chromosomes is reduced to half in each sperm and egg cell. Let me just make sure I got that right. Yep. Okay. Good. All right. So let's keep trucking with this meiosis 2 business. It begins with prophase 2. During prophase 2, spindles form that move chromosomes near the middle of the cell. Then, as you can probably see in the diagram, during metaphase 2, the chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. Great. Check that off the list. Now let's look at what happens during anaphase 2. The sister chromatids finally get separated, and individual daughter chromosomes move toward opposite ends of the cell. Then it's during the last of the 4 steps, telophase 2, that the nuclei form around the daughter chromosomes. Okay, now like I said, this is the last of the 4 meiosis 2 steps. However, cytokinesis is happening at the exact same time, and it separates each of the 2 cells in half. And after all is said and done, the result is 4 reproductive cells with half the number of chromosomes as the original cell. You with me? Well, how about we look at an example? If the original parent cell were from a human, then it would contain 46 chromosomes. This is because, thanks to meiosis, each sperm cell would contain 23 chromosomes and each egg cell would contain 23 chromosomes too. So, when one sperm cell with 23 chromosomes and one egg cell with 23 chromosomes combine, they form one fertilized cell with 46 chromosomes. The full set for humans. From this example, we know that this cell with its full set of chromosomes is now ready for mitosis. And this, of course, will cause the organism to grow and develop. So I know that was a ton of information, but the main takeaway here is that sexual reproduction creates offspring with half the chromosomes from each parent. Feel free to review all this while I grab a quick question. See you later, alligator.